But you know, you have to see that drop, as dizzying as it was, in the context of the even more dizzying increases we've seen in the Dow and other indexes in recent months. And now we see yields suddenly rising on Treasury bonds and the prospect of higher interest rates this year. So the bottom line, it just seems like some kind of adjustment might well have been overdue.
Ron Elving, Senior Politics Editor and Correspondent, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Scott.
And last night, of course, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes defended the release of that Republican memo on Fox News.
I didn't want to have to do this, but the sad part is that I have an obligation to the American people.
For more than a year now, Mr. Nunes has been central to the Russia investigation, but his time in Washington, D.C. goes back more than a decade. NPR's Kelsey Snell has more on the man behind the man.
For most of his career, Devin Nunes was a relatively anonymous congressman. He represents a district in the Central Valley of California and spent his first several years in Congress pushing legislation to help the area's dairy industry.
Yeah, this has unanimous support across California. Unanimous. Every dairy farmer in the state of California has sent letters to their congressman.
But from the beginning, Nunes was close to power in Congress. His early alliances with rising conservative stars like Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan set him on a path to prominence that seemed to be heading in the direction of agriculture or taxes. He made national headlines back in 2013 when there was a government shutdown largely blamed on objections to Obamacare by the Tea Party wing of the GOP. Nunes was quoted as calling them a group of lemmings wearing suicide vests.
Well, it's not Tea Party caucus at all. It's a lemming caucus. It's guys who meet privately. They're always conspiring. It's mostly just about power, and it's just gotten us nowhere.
That was from CNN, and that critique drew him closer to party leaders who were fighting back the rising populist tide in Washington. Nunes spent the next few years toiling away and waiting for his turn as chairman of the powerful House Intelligence Committee. He landed that spot in 2015 and dug into the scandal surrounding Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. During the 2016 campaign, he briefed Republican candidates on intelligence matters. One of them was Donald Trump, and the two grew close. After Election Day, the committee began to turn its attention to Russian interference in the election, a probe that continued after Nunes was appointed to the executive committee overseeing the Trump transition. That all started out fine. Listen to how Nunes' Democratic counterpart Adam Schiff talked about the inquiry in March of 2017.
The chairman and I are doing everything that we can to keep this investigation bipartisan or nonpartisan, to make sure that we follow the evidence wherever it leads.
But just a week later, Nunes called reporters to the same spot where Schiff declared their bipartisanship. He was there to back up a claim that President Trump had made on Twitter. A claim that is still not backed up by evidence that the Obama administration tapped the phones at Trump Tower.
The administration, I don't think, is aware of this, so I want to make sure that I go over there and tell them what I know, because it involves them.
Nunes said the information came from an anonymous whistleblower, but what followed was a rush of accusations that Nunes was working with the White House. That was a turning point, even for some Republicans like Lindsey Graham. He spoke to NBC's Today Show.
The problem that he's created is he's gone off on alert by himself, sort of an Inspector Clouseau investigation here.
And as Graham went on to say, it was more than a temporary problem. Nunes hadn't told his colleagues what he was looking into before he went to share it with the White House, and he never shared information to back up the claim. He was then forced to leave the helm of the Russia probe under the cloud of an ethics investigation. In December, after he was cleared of any wrongdoing, Washington was abuzz about a secret memo critical of the FBI. The lead author was Devin Nunes. Now he's in the middle of a political hurricane, and his early allies, McCarthy and Ryan, are standing by his side, now as Majority Leader and Speaker of the House. Just this week, Ryan defended Nunes.
So he's focusing on keeping our country safe, focused on national security. I think what they're trying to do is just sidetrack us with some political gain.
And there are no signs that Nunes is going to leave his position of power atop the House Intelligence Committee anytime soon. Kelsey Snell, NPR News, Washington.
The one thing I do not want to be called is First Lady. Jacqueline Kennedy once said, it sounds like a saddle horse. You may not have noticed, I try to avoid saying First Lady on the air. But Hillary Rodham Clinton noticed when we interviewed her at the White House years ago and told me she thought I was being fussy. I don't use it much personally, she told us, but I don't object to people using it because it is a tradition. But I still try to avoid the phrase First Lady because it's not the title of any real constitutional office. It embodies an antique view that the spouse of a president is some kind of public official. So, I don't know why Melania Trump wore what she did to the State of the Union address, why she traveled with guests in a separate car, or if she's deliberately avoided public appearances with the president since the middle of January. I'm in the news business, but I don't consider that any of my business. I do cherish memories of strong independent women who were married to presidents and made their own vivid memories. Eleanor Roosevelt, wearing a hard hat to go 2 miles down into an Ohio coal mine to hear from miners, eminent gentlemen who were crusted with soot about their wages and working conditions. Jacqueline Kennedy, she strode ahead of world leaders from Charles de Gaulle to Haile Selassie to walk in her husband's funeral procession and give America's grief a graceful face. Betty Ford, who'd been a young dance student with Martha Graham, joining young Chinese dancers in a series of moves that spoke a common language. And Barbara Bush, who knew she was not the first choice of Wellesley students to be their 1990 commencement speaker, winning them over when she said, "You will never regret not having passed one more test, not winning one more verdict, or not closing one more deal. You will regret time not spent with a husband, a child, a friend, or a parent." They were determined women who knew they were in a public spotlight and decided to try to bring that light to other people and interests. But it should also be possible, especially in these times of supercharged celebrity, the spouse of a president just to be left alone, out of that spotlight, free from second-guessing and occasional mockery. As Barbara Bush told the Wellesley class of 1990, somewhere out in this audience may even be someone who will one day follow in my footsteps, preside over the White House as the president's spouse. I wish him well.
If I ran the country, I'd be your first lady and fix up the White House while you were away. Waiting while you're passing time with world leaders, blending on together a lonely life lane.
The sweet sounds of Johnny Cash on Weekend Edition Saturday. Good morning, I'm Dave Heller, along with Tina Brock. It's 8:18 on this chilly Saturday morning. Thanks for listening to Weekend Edition. Thanks for starting your day with us during this, our winter membership campaign, when we hope that listeners become members. Why? Well, you're listening now, and all the great programming you're hearing, whether it's Scott Simon or coming up Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, or You Bet Your Garden, is all made possible with member support. Let us thank you next. We're looking for that first caller this morning. Click that donate button at whyy.org. Give us a call at 888-345-9499. Good morning, Tina.
Good morning, Dave, and I'm excited to be here during the Winter Pledge Drive to make that case, lay it out for people why their support is so very, very important to us here at WHYY. And we know that more folks are listening than ever before for good reason. There's so much happening in our world, and you need to have a place you can go where that's all distilled for you and very clear. And the weekend is a wonderful time to sort of sit back and recalculate and reorganize and rethink about your week. And as we look for 50 pledges in this hour, you could be that person that makes that commitment to maybe a first-time pledge if you've never before done this at WHYY. The number for you to call is 888-345-9499.
Or perhaps you are a renewing member. Perhaps you came aboard last year, for example. Started the new administration and entertaining year, making sense of so much that needs to be made sense of. We are honored to be held in that esteem if you rely on us for news that's smart, succinct, contextual. Thanks for that. Can we then honor you by having you call us at 888-345-9499 or click that donate button, whyy.org. You know, it's tempting to say, well, I'll get around to it. Maybe the neighbor down the street or my cousin across the way. Do your part, others will do theirs. Let us thank you next, but first you have to call.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Babbel, a language app that teaches real-life conversations in a new language, including Spanish, French, and German. Babbel's 10 to 15-minute lessons are available in the App Store or online at Babbel, BABBEL.com. And from Yunada, creators of the Japanese-made Dreamwave massage chair, with shiatsu point detection and 16 programmed massages, including morning and nighttime sessions. Retail dealers nationwide. More at dreamwavechair.com.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Scott Simon. Back in the olden days, there was a pointedly bipartisan atmosphere on congressional intelligence committees. That's how Paul Pillar remembers it, at least. The 28-year CIA veteran often presented briefings to the House Intelligence Committee in the 1980s. It compares that different atmosphere with today's climate in the columns of the national interest. Mr. Pillar joins us from our studio. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good to be with you, Scott.
First off, assume you've read the memo.
Yes.
Any reaction?
I don't think it really tells us much of anything beyond the motives of those who put the memo together and why they released it. I think Mr. Elvin's description earlier this morning of the memo is quite apt.
Senator John McCain, nobody's pushover, said release of the memo only helps Vladimir Putin.
Well, anytime you have a disclosure like this of something that was classified and it's disclosed without the review of the agencies that were originators of it, you have at least indirect damage. Not that somebody is going to go out and get shot, but rather it's going to discourage other potential sources of information, including intelligence sources that might be pertinent to what the Russians are doing, who are going to be discouraged, who are going to think twice whether they come to one of the U.S. intelligence agencies and offer their support.
I don't want to get sentimental, but in the past there hasn't been this kind of hyperpartisanship.
Well, it's been a long progression, Scott. I mean, you referred back to the 1980s when, based on my experience, there was quite a bit of good bipartisanship. And I would say since the 1990s, about when Newt Gingrich declared political warfare, we've had an increase infecting of partisanship even into the work of the two intelligence committees. So things have come up in the past. I mean, for example, the issue of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, also known as torture, which had a partisan edge in that on the Senate side you had a Democratic majority report and a competing Republican minority report, and then the CIA had its own response. And, you know, one can argue about how effective this instance of dueling briefs might have been in illuminating that whole issue for the American public, but it certainly wasn't anything like what we've seen in the current instance, where you have, to be quite frank, a blatant use of the House Intelligence Committee for the purpose of trying to preemptively discredit findings of the special counsel.
But then I'm glad you mentioned the disagreement between the two parties about if the phrase was what enhanced interrogation techniques. Because it is, among other things, the responsibility of Senate and House committees to oversee government action and to step in and make corrections and, for that matter, alert the public when they think intelligence agencies are going over the line.
The House and Senate Intelligence Committees, which date from the 1970s, after we had some scandals involving domestic surveillance, play a very important role in ensuring that the activities of U.S. intelligence agencies are consistent with the values of the American public. They in essence serve as surrogates for the American public, since most of those activities by their very nature cannot be made public. So we have these elected members of Congress who have the security clearances, and they look at the classified information, and on behalf of you and me and the rest of the American citizenry, they stand in judgment over whether these activities are legitimate or not.
I have to ask you, as an intelligence analyst, when the president says figure that out for yourself, do you read that as an invitation for example, Rod Rosenstein to resign, or Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, to resign, or should they not?
I read that as that the president has his gun sights aimed at Mr. Rosenstein, among others.
And Christopher Wray, perhaps.
And perhaps Christopher Wray, although you know, given that he was Mr. Trump's own appointee to replace James Comey, that will be an interesting thing to play out. But I think we should note that Christopher Wray has taken a rather firm line on behalf of the FBI's interest and received a firm statement of support from the FBI Officers Association.
Paul Pillar, CIA veteran, now senior fellow at Georgetown. Thanks for being with us.
It was my pleasure.
Imagine you've been diagnosed with cancer. You've been told it's terminal. Doctors have tried everything. The only option left may be experimental, unapproved drugs. You want these drugs no matter what the risk. This week, President Trump urged Congress to pass what's called the Right to Try Act in the State of the Union address. deal. Michael Becker is the former CEO of the Union Experts. Answer greetings. Mr. Becker also has terminal cancer. Michael Becker joins us from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me.
And I have to begin by asking you, how are you?
Feeling pretty good. Quality of life at the moment is not too bad, and happy to still be here.
Why are you suspicious of the right to try it?
You know, I agree with President Trump that patients like me that are facing a terminal illness should have an opportunity to access experimental drugs. Fortunately, we already do. It's the compassionate use mechanism through the Food and Drug Administration.
Having read about you just don't believe that this would be redundant, but could be dangerous.
Yeah, if you put the two side by side, there's only one difference, and that is the FDA. The FDA gets taken out of the equation with the proposed legislation. The FDA is in the equation with the existing regulations. Compassionate use process is extremely easy. Basically, go to your doctor, find one who will agree to administer the therapy, contact the drug company, see if they're also willing to agree, fill out paperwork, and then if the FDA doesn't object, the patient can get the treatment. And the only difference with the new legislation is that last part, the FDA is taken out of the equation.
With respect, why care so much about the FDA if the life is hanging in the balance?
So, as a terminal cancer patient, I would, obviously love to try something that's going to prolong my life or cure my cancer. The reality is that that's a very, very small statistic in terms of drug development discovery. Only 5% of drugs that go through phase 1 development actually go on to be approved. So you're talking about giving people medications that, in historical context, have only had a 5% chance of actually working at the end of the day. And then you're exposing these patients to potentially additional toxicities that could accelerate their death or cause additional problems for them.
I'm sure you've run all of this through your mind. Why not? I was about to ask you, why not let the patient decide? Why not let you decide?
Well, the problem becomes that you have a lot of false hope as a terminal cancer patient. You want to cling to anything that's going to sound like it's an opportunity to live longer or have a better quality of life. And that hope can sometimes cover up the realities of some of the more sinister aspects of getting the drug, which are things go wrong. So I could take a drug that was purported to help me, and it may actually make my condition worse. It could create other difficulties for me, and then my quality of life may be even worse than it was originally. That's what I would fear or what I do fear as a patient.
And would it potentially take advantage of people at their most vulnerable?
Absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I see miracle cures and herbal remedies and everything from unsolicited emails to internet ads, talking about cures and treatments for cancer. If you take the FDA as the policeman out of that equation, I'm scared to death as to what cancer patients or other patients facing terminal illnesses may be subjected to.
Well, Mr. Becker, good luck to you. We were so grateful to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott.
The controversial logo will be removed from the uniforms of the Cleveland Indians baseball team for the 2019 season. But the caricature of a red-faced Native American called Chief Wahoo will continue to appear in merchandise. 2018 Native American names and imagery still abound in the United States on products, on sports franchises, and weaponry. Paul Chubb Smith would like us to take notice. He co-curated a new exhibit at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. It showcases hundreds of objects with Native American imagery, and it's called Americans. Paul Chubb Smith joins us in our studios. Thanks so much for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Now, as is known, my father was the field announcer for the Cleveland Indians, and I don't mind saying I'm glad to see the end of Chief Wahoo. I won't even bring myself to say the name of Washington, D.C.'s football team on the air. But do you believe it's possible that some team names or images Braves, Seahawks, Blackhawks, can be genuine tributes to Native Americans?
I do think it's possible, and I do think the intent of Chief Wahoo was to add value to the team, to give it an identity, and it was created at a time in which those sorts of caricatures were acceptable. Clearly, any cartoonish character like that of any ethnic group would be unacceptable now. But, you know, the intent was there, and I think it's interesting to look at why it makes sense for so many different products, teams, weapon systems, things in your pantry to connect with American Indians. We're so used to it here in the United States, but when you step back, it's really a freaking weird phenomenon.
Let me ask you about weaponry. I guess I hadn't realized it until we were reviewing this material. Tomahawk missiles, Apache helicopters, can they be seen as tributes to the staunch warrior qualities of Native Americans?
It really does stem from that, and there's really a connection between weaponry and sports teams. You know, the idea of a fierce warrior. One of the things visitors will learn to our exhibition is that by fiat, the Pentagon names all helicopters after an Indian tribe or individual, and now they consult with Native Americans. So the White Mountain Apache are thrilled that the Apache helicopter has that name. There are differences of opinion within the Native community on this and many other issues, but the idea is interesting since, of course, the Apache were enemies of the United States for a long time.
Yeah, and a lot of Apaches were killed by U.S. military weaponry.
Yeah.
The Land O'Lakes Butterbugs. There's Native American on that, and an informal poll of people taken around here suggests a lot of people don't even see her.
Well, she's in your refrigerator, and God knows what she's doing at night. I never look closely at it myself. I do buy that brand. And when you look at it closely, what you see is she's kneeling and she's holding the box that she's in. And so it recedes into infinity. In other words, you know, in that box you see her again and again and again. So it's this amazing combination of American identity, a generic Indian, with a really brilliant graphic design that, you know, you don't really notice, but I really do think she's up to something at night in the refrigerator.
I'll check. Is it offensive?
I think some of it is, some of it isn't. You know, one reason I'm so happy the retiring Chief Wahoo is because even though I'm a National League fan, the Indians have been my favorite AL team the last several years. They're an incredibly exciting team. So when I'm watching as a fan, I would really love to appreciate the players and not have this offensive logo out there. So I think it's really good for them. What we're hoping is that rather than getting too prescriptive about this is offensive, this needs to change, in this case it's okay, look at this larger phenomenon that's really tied to American national identity that's in all of our lives from our earliest memories as Americans. It's really the most enduring brand in the history of American advertising.
I gather the exhibit's going to be up for 5 years, right?
Correct.
What do you hope somebody who goes through there, how they might be touched or changed?
The museum's challenge has always been that most Americans don't live in areas where there are lots of Indians. So they come in with nothing to do with Indians. They've never met an Indian, and they're learning as cultural tourists. I think when they visit our show, they'll see that actually they have all these connections to Indians, whether it's a video from South Park, or it's John Ford's masterpiece Stagecoach, or it's Land O'Lakes Butter Maiden. There are all these things that connect you to it. They're not real Indians, obviously. But I think all of that is going to start looking a little bit different, and it's the beginning of a different kind of conversation.
Paul Schott-Smith, he's co-curator of the new exhibition Americans that's at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks for listening to Weekend Edition Saturday on WHYY. It's 8:35. Good morning. I'm Dave Heller. Joining me is Tina Brock and a room full of volunteers eager to take your call. This is our winter membership campaign when listeners become members, and then I'm here to say it's a whole different kind of listening. You're doing it as an investor, as a shareholder in this great service. We say news when you need it, entertainment when you want it. Weekend Edition Saturday is an example of both. At 10 o'clock, we're going to shift a little bit more to the entertainment side with Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, another great program. We are a feast at WHYY. Partake what you will, from soup to nuts. Take a moment and value it. What do you derive from WHYY? And that will determine when you call how much you want to commit to as a member. We suggest a sustainer membership with that. Until you tell us otherwise, we can count on you. And as always, you can count on us 24/7, 365. Good morning, Tina Brock.
Good morning, Dave Heller, and I'm so delighted to be sitting here in this place that is really the center of, in many ways, the city. We bring together ideas, we bring together people as a community, and the way the service that keeps you informed not only about your community but about your world grows stronger with each and every person who decides to become part of that family. And it really is a family. And you mentioned a sustainer pledge, Dave. That is a way for you to have an ongoing commitment to the growth and the sustainability and the support of this, and it grows stronger with each and every pledge. One thing that has been particularly exciting for me and that I just want to mention is if you become a sustainer at $5 a month, you have access to WHYY Passport, which is it's accessible on your computer, your smartphones, your tablet. It's a member benefit that gives you access to an on-demand library of great public television programming. We know a lot of people in public television listen to radio as well. You can catch up with Poldark, you can catch up with Victoria. It's there for you anytime, and it's that entertainment piece that you were talking about before, Dave. You get to the weekend, you're thinking, you're listening to the radio, you're kind of relaxing and rejuvenating, and you have your to-do list and those things that you're thinking about during the week and that you may not get to, and now is the time you can make that pledge and help this family and this service and this commitment to your community grow, and it grows stronger with each and every pledge. How do you do that? Well, you can click the donate button on WHYY.org or 888-345-9499.
When you call that number, you'll be greeted by a representative from Concerned Citizens for Democracy and or Greater Philadelphia Center for Spiritual Living, as well as folks from Keystone Care, all here, all giving their time because they believe in this great service. You do too, because you're listening right now. But I'm here again to say that as an investor, as a member, you can say, hey, I made that story happen. I helped with that report, that great interview on Fresh Air, that great hour on Radio Times with Marty Moskowitz, all made possible with your support. Again, 888-345-9499.
So Dave, everybody that makes a pledge, and this is pretty exciting. Obviously, we're getting ready for the Super Bowl, and we have a wonderful traditional way of sharing the joy and sharing the love here at WHYY when you make your pledge. For every pledge that we receive today, WHYY is feeding the bird, and what can be a little more specific here, an American bald eagle, that is, or birds of prey who are being taken care of by the American Eagle Foundation, which is located in Tennessee. And it's a nonprofit organization that is protecting and caring for bald eagles and birds of prey. What we're doing is meals to Challenger and other birds of prey under the American Eagle Foundation. So your pledge goes so much further in this weekend when we're eagle-related, football-related, and caring about the communities and making that pledge go further.
I'll see you. WHYY member card, good for discounts, cultural places and retail outlets across the Philadelphia region. Help answer you like a blue your way as well. What we can't put in the mail, though, is the value of self-satisfaction of knowing that you've done your part to keep WHYY strong for the Philadelphia region and wherever you are. WHYY website, you can take us with you across the country, across the world. All made possible with your support. Let's thank you now, but first you have to call 888-345-9499 or click that donate button at WHYY.org. Thanks so much for your support.
The Philadelphia Orchestra supports WHYY. This week, former music director Christoph Eschenbach returns to Verizon Hall with a passionate program featuring Beethoven's infamous Fifth Symphony, and Alyssa Weilerstein performs Schumann's intensely personal cello concerto. For your tickets, 215-893-1999 or online at phil.org. This Thursday Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in the Kimmel Center.
Rutgers University in Camden supports WHYY and offers 25 graduate courses in Camden and including programs at Rutgers Camden are online at camden.edu or 855-6104.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, celebrating 20 years of grant making to jazz artists and the organizations that support them.